Hi, I'm your host, Marsha Florence for Just Ask. Today's show, ladies and gentlemen, is Crisis Intervention Team Training. Hurry back and join us. Hi, I'm your host, Marsha Florence for Just Ask. Today's show, ladies and gentlemen, is Crisis Intervention Team Training, and we have the Executive Director himself, Kevin Fischer from NAMI. Good afternoon, Kevin Fischer.
Good afternoon. Good to see you again.
Good to see you as always. Now, Kevin, I said NAMI, and I should have just gave out the entire name, okay? But I'm going to let you fill us in. All right.
Sure. So NAMI is the National Alliance on Mental Illness. We're the nation's largest grassroots mental health advocacy organization.
Okay, and your role as the Executive Director there?
Of NAMI, Michigan, not the entire country.
Okay, all right. So, Kevin, I always have a chance to do an interview with you on Facebook. Mm-hmm. Today you're in the studio with us, and I'm so glad you made it here today with us. But I wanted to start off to let the viewers know, tell us a little bit about yourself and your involvement with NAMI.
So I'm a retired businessman. I came to NAMI in 2011, unfortunately shortly after losing my oldest son, Dominique, to suicide. In 2007, Dominique was diagnosed with serious mental illness. And we learned very quickly how little we knew about the mental health care system, and so we struggled trying to get him the appropriate care. Unfortunately, on June 27th of 2010, we lost him to suicide. And in late 2010, early 2011, I discovered NAMI, really trying to manage the grief process for myself and understand what I didn't know, because obviously that's very frustrating as a father to not be able to help your child. So I joined NAMI trying to help myself. One thing led to another. In 2014, I became the executive director for Michigan on an interim basis, and 9 years later, I'm still here, and I love the opportunity to help people.
That's wonderful. And I'm, sorry that you had to have a tragedy in your life to get to this level. But I know one thing: the organization is proud to have you. Okay, you make things happen. So, I do know that you guys have come together with the CIT program?
CIT International, which is Crisis Intervention Team Training International. NAMI helped start CIT in Memphis, Tennessee back in 1988 when, unfortunately, in two separate incidents, unarmed men who were experiencing behavioral health crisis were shot and killed by the local police. And the local NAMI affiliate there said, that's not good enough. We can't just execute people who have mental illness because you don't know how to properly interact with them. So we formed a collaboration between the local NAMI affiliate, the Memphis Police Department, and the University of Memphis, and created what we now call CIT International, which is literally the gold standard of crisis response programs in the country.
Okay, and you guys have a 3-digit phone number? What is it? Like 911, but you guys have what?
Yeah, about a year ago, July 16th of 2022, the new 988 crisis and suicide prevention line went live because we didn't want people who are experiencing crisis to have to remember a 10-digit phone number. And so that is a part of the crisis response continuum as well, because it's not just law enforcement. Ultimately, what we really want to do is intervene as early as possible, literally before a person reaches crisis. When we notice something is going on with them, with their mental health, we want to intervene then, because early intervention leads to better outcomes, and it keeps law enforcement out of it. So it's really important that we understand what resources are available to us in our community, like 988, because if you call the 988 number, though it's a national number, it will connect you to local resources.
Okay, I was going to ask that. So, the number itself is 988. So that number, no matter what state you're in,
No matter what state you're in.
okay, you can use that number.
Yes.
And then it will connect you to the nearest resources of your need, of your crisis need.
Correct.
Okay, okay. So now, do families really recognize that number? Now, I mean, we talk about mental illness, and it could be at any stage and anyone, and yet the 988 number is a brand new system.
Yeah, and that's a great question. 988, though it's only a year old, we have had overwhelming response. But what I need people to understand is, when we launched 911 so many years ago, it took decades for it to catch on. So we know there's going to be a ramp-up period or a period of time that it takes the public to really absorb that number and utilize it. But we are really happy with the response and the utilization that we've received so far.
Okay. So for each, is a city or state that can use the 988? Each state?
It's the entire country.
Okay.
So it's one, it's the one number for the entire country. Okay. And what happens is if you call the 988 crisis line, they will connect you to local resources in your community. So you don't even have to say, this is Kevin Fischer, I'm in Detroit, Michigan, or Los Angeles, California. They pick it by your the area code connected to your phone. And they'll say, you need resources in this community.
And this is a 24-hour number?
24/7, 365.
That's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about. Because crisis happen in the middle of the night.
Yeah, crisis doesn't work just 9 to 5.
Right. Something's going on, and somebody calls the number. But see, people have the habit, because that's all I know is 911. Let me call 911 and see if I can get somebody out here. But now they have the option to call 988. Now with the 988 number, and you say they connect you to the resources. If a family member still feels though law enforcement needs to come out, does the 988 connect them to that as well?
Yes. When you call into the 988 number, they will ask you a series of questions, and one of those questions will be, is there an imminent threat of danger at this time? Is the person you're calling for, or if it's you yourself, are you at risk to harming yourself or others? And they may even ask you, do you have a weapon? Do you have a means? And if those answers are yes, then they will transfer that call to law enforcement. But I want to stress, one of the things that we really like to do is whenever it's possible, we don't want to involve law enforcement. Our law enforcement officers are overstressed and overworked, and we don't want them on scene unless a person is a danger to themselves or others.
Right. I mean, because, in the last several months, when law enforcement has been involved, it's been a tragedy, just honestly speaking. And somebody in the family say, I called to get help, and now my son is gone. Okay, and that's just heartbreaking in itself. But how well is the training going for CTI?
The training is going tremendously well. Again, we've been around since 1988. The problem that we have, honestly, is that the term CIT, or Crisis Intervention Team, or Crisis Intervention Training, sometimes gets a little confusing. And the best way I can explain it is all CIT programs are not equal. For example, my analogy is the term CIT has become to the crisis response world as Kleenex is to the tissue world. When you sneeze, a lot of people say, give me a Kleenex, but I might be handing you the store brand. And you really need to understand the elements that are involved in your crisis response program. For example, I just mentioned one is we don't want law enforcement on scene unless there is a threat of danger. The other thing that we want the public to understand is that crisis intervention team training is not just training, and it's not just for law enforcement.
Okay.
We say it's a community program. Our crisis intervention team program is a 40-hour training that brings together law enforcement, behavioral health professionals, advocates like myself, and people with lived experience. So we want everybody.
So the family should be involved.
Yes,
Families, okay.
We want all the stakeholders involved to have a voice at the table, because at the end of the day, We want everybody to go home safely.
Right.
We want law enforcement to go home safely, but your loved ones have the right to go home safely as well.
That's right. That's right. Well, Kevin, we're going to take a break. Ladies and gentlemen, I wanted to keep going, but we got to take a break in here, and we'll be right back with CIT. We'll be right back.
If you love them enough to suck the snot out of their nose at 4 a.m., then surely you'll check NHTSA.gov/the right seat to make sure they're in the right car seat.
And welcome back to the second half of the show. And I shouldn't say second, it's just ongoing great information that you, the community, needs to know. So, ladies and gentlemen, get your pen and paper out. Most definitely you want to call us, 1-800-323-5336, or email me, Marcia at Just Ask Talk Show. And if you have a question for Executive Director Kevin Fischer of NAMI, please, by all means, you want to know more about the Crisis Intervention Training Program, definitely you want to reach out to us so we can get this information over to Mr. Fischer and get your questions answered. And definitely you want to learn more about the 988 number, how to utilize it, when to utilize it, and know that it's available for you if you have a family member or yourself is in crisis. So Kevin, I wanted to say that because a lot of times when people are watching the show, they do find, some useful tools, and they say, hey, I'm going to try and find out what can I know, what can I do, what can I find out. But I want to go back to everybody versus stigma. Okay, now, I thought you was going to wear that famous shirt of yours, but tell us a little bit about everybody versus stigma.
So it really started back in 2017 as a part of the NAMI Walks event, Mental Health Awareness Walk that we host every year. We have individual teams, and my foundation has a team every year, and every year, if someone donates like $50 to my team, I will give them a team shirt. So we have a theme every year. And for 2017, it was everybody versus stigma. And so my wife and I didn't do much with that until 2021, as we were in the throes of the pandemic, and there were stories after stories coming out about how the pandemic was impacting young people in such a negative manner. And I was becoming more and more frustrated with, we have the slogan, you are not alone. But when you're a person who is experiencing depression or anxiety, you feel alone because stigma is isolating. And whether you're a person who's living with that, or even if you're a caregiver, as I was with my son, there were times where he and I literally said, it's just me and him against the world, because we didn't feel like we had support. So that's what born everybody versus stigma. And in 21, with that frustration, I told my wife, we have to do something to let people know they're not alone. It's one thing to say it, it's another thing to see it. So that's why we brought Everybody versus Stigma back, and we just wanted to see if it would be a conversation starter, because part of the problem with stigma is, again, it's the leading barrier that prevents people from taking the first steps to get the help that they need. But if they saw somebody else wearing that shirt, they say, I know Marcia knows how I feel, or this gentleman might know how I feel. And it's done exactly that. Every time I wear the shirt, everywhere I go, grocery store, airport, restaurants, people will literally interrupt me in a meal and say, I'm sorry, sir, can you tell me about the shirt? Wonderful. And I just want to get the conversation started, because that's how we eliminate the stigma.
So that logo is standard, that's it? That's
yes,
your standard. Okay.
That is we trademarked everybodyversusstigma.com, and people can go there and learn not only more about the brand, because we don't just consider it a brand, it's a movement. And we want that movement to also provide people with those resources. So we're constantly building our website so people can connect with us and say, hey, how do I find a behavioral health care provider?
That's great. That's great. I wanted to ask you a question, and I know this might tie in with the CIT program. So the late Benny Napoleon, I know that you guys were close and were working together. How is he tied into the crisis intervention program?
Benny's loss was devastating in so many ways. Just prior to the pandemic, Benny was very heavily involved in and supportive of the Crisis Intervention Team program. And he recognized the importance of making sure communities knew what they were getting and making sure they had the best of it and standardizing it across the state. So one of Benny's goals was to make sure that we made sure every community in Michigan had the gold standard CIT training program. Unfortunately, we lost Benny to COVID, and he didn't have an opportunity to carry that message forward. And so I can't think of a better way to honor his memory than to, and I'm hoping legislators will agree with me, that we establish the Benny Napoleon CIT bill in Michigan and provide a statewide comprehensive CIT training program that's available to every community in Michigan, because I know that's what he would have wanted.
That's great. That's great. And you know, when you have people like Benny Napoleon involved, they know what's out here. I mean, you know, he worked in law enforcement all his life, and he could see the changes in the dynamics in family values and family commitment, and then law enforcement involvement. So it made sense to, you know, have him involved in it. And I'm sure if he was here, you know, it would be at another level, even so much now. But we do like to see that bill get passed, and hopefully it will. And it will support, you know, you guys' concept with the crisis intervention training. Now, I wanted to ask you something in particular. So, with the training, are you guys using, like, I shouldn't say using, involving, as the cities go from city to city, the police departments, so that they can train? Is it cross training? Is it city to city training? Because something about it, you know, like, well, they do it over here in Detroit, but they don't do it over here in Troy.
Well, and that's part of the problem, and that's why we want to standardize it. We want to establish a state CIT office so we can make sure that the CIT program that we have in Wayne County is the same as we have in Oakland County and Washtenaw County. That is the goal, because it does vary. You know, CIT has been around since 1988, and thus far, there are a little over 17,000 law enforcement agencies in the United States. Only about 7,000 or 8,000 utilize the CIT program that we're talking about. But what's really interesting, Marsha, and that the public needs to understand, is that when CIT is utilized properly in those communities, it has reduced the instance of injury to officers and civilians by up to 80%. That's huge.
It is.
And we don't want people to be afraid to call the police. And going back to what you just mentioned, you know, law enforcement officers get a bad rap. And I will say, you know, we have some struggles. You know, I always like to say we have a few bad law enforcement officers, like we have a few bad plumbers and garbage men and the like. But I want the public to understand, I've trained hundreds of officers. And one of the things that I can tell you, regardless as to their ethnicity or background, most officers are trying to get it right. They simply lack the training and the time that's available. Benny understood that. Chief White understands that. Most people don't realize Chief White is a licensed counselor.
Okay.
Most law enforcement officers are just as passionate about this as I am. They want to get it right. They just need the training.
You know, I'm wondering, for all the new and upcoming law enforcement officers, why isn't it in corporate? CIT should be incorporated in the training along with you becoming a police officer. I mean, maybe it's a little too early for that, but, you know, in order for you to understand what you're doing and, you know, when to and when not to be involved, or how to try to find other ways to break down a situation without, you know, force. I believe that the crisis intervention program should be included with the training of becoming a future officer.
We are trying to get there. You know, we recognize they only have so much time in the academy. And sometimes we want people to have a certain level of experience before they try to apply that.
Right.
So there are a lot of variables involved, but I agree with you in principle that that's the way we want to go. We want to make sure we have the best trained response available, keeping in mind that if we are proactive, law enforcement's role will be reduced. We want to reduce law enforcement's role in this as much as we can, because part of a crisis response system is mobile crisis units. It's co-responder units where we have law enforcement who have behavioral health care professionals ride along with them. The vast majority of the crisis runs don't involve threats of danger. So we can have behavioral health care professionals respond instead of law enforcement whenever possible.
That's great.
That's what we want to get to.
That's great. That's great. Well, I tell you what, we're going to take a break, and ladies and gentlemen, we'll be right back. And get your pen and paper out. We'll be right back.
If you love them enough to crawl into a play place to get them to come down, then surely you'll check nhtsa.gov/the-right seat to make sure they're in the right car seat.
And welcome back to the show. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I know a lot of you have experienced the loss of a loved one due to a mental illness or a crisis in your family, or you heard about something. But we do know that all law enforcement, dealing with law enforcement is not always a bad thing. So we want you to understand that when you see the news, it's not always going to be the negative side of what law enforcement did. There are some positive things that law enforcement is doing along with the crisis center. So, Kevin, we can say it all day long that what I saw in the news was a tragedy all day long. Mm-hmm. But what are some of the positive effects of the crisis center?
So, again, first thing we want people to know is don't call law enforcement unless there's a threat of danger. But people also need to understand that, as you just mentioned, you only get to see the one or two incidents that go bad. People don't realize, for example, Detroit police goes on thousands of mental health crisis runs a month that get resolved peacefully, where nobody goes to jail, nobody goes to the hospital, nobody gets harmed. They take them to crisis centers, which are like urgent cares, and get people the help that they need. But we don't talk enough about that.
We don't.
We're really excited that this August, the crisis response world is going to descend on Detroit. We will be hosting for the first time the CIT International Conference here at the Marriott at the Renaissance Center, August 14th and 16th. And I encourage every one of your viewers to contact your local, whether you live in a city, township, you should contact them and say, what crisis response program do we have in our community? And are you sending a representative to this conference? And I'm not saying that to sell tickets. That is where you will learn what all the options are out there that will benefit your community. And so I encourage people to challenge the leadership in your community to be present, to ask questions, to learn more about what resources are available, learn what they're doing that's working in Arizona and Ohio and Indiana, because I will say this, and I say this as constructive criticism. Michigan's behind the rest of the country when it comes to this. Many other states, our surrounding states, have implemented things that we haven't gotten to yet, and we can get there. There's no reason we can't catch up and surpass them, but we have to have the will to do it.
Right. And the inclusion of everyone involved. It's not just law enforcement. It's the public. So we really want to know, so what is it that the public can do? How can the public be involved?
So what the public can do is be involved literally in your CIT program in your community. Again, we say CIT is more than training. It's a community program because we bring all of the stakeholders to the table, people with lived experience, advocates, behavioral health care professionals, law enforcement, or I should say first responders, because we have firefighters and EMTs and others who participate. But the other really critical part of the CIT program is what we call the Community Steering Committee. And that's where community members can be involved. And what the steering committee does is every month or quarterly, depending on the number of crisis runs in your community, because you have some larger cities and some smaller, but they meet and they review every crisis run that law enforcement goes on. And they say what went well, what didn't go well, what can we do better? Can we utilize more non-lethal means to subdue somebody rather than just going to a firearm? Do we have a crisis urgent care center in our community? Do we need one? Those are the things that the steering committee addresses, and that's where we take the voice of the community.
That's great. That's great. I mean, Kevin, you and I can go on and on. So most definitely, I know people are going to contact us to make sure that they get this information. You guys have a walk coming up. So
Yes.
Your walk is annual.
We do. So NAMI hosts an annual NAMI Walks event, and we host it throughout the state of Michigan. It's typically during the months of September. Every now and then on the west side of the state, because of scheduling, I might have to get into October, but I try to stay away from those cold months. We really encourage people to come out and support the NAMI Walks event. Many of us support all kinds of charities and organizations. I've never had cancer, but I support the Sister
Right.
Strut and Breast Cancer Walk and Heart Walks. We need people to support the NAMI Walks because it's the nation's largest mental health awareness raising walk. And it is a demonstration to people who live with mental illness that they're not alone and that people will come out and support them like they'll support anybody else. So we really encourage people to come out and support us. You can find NAMI Walks online at namiwalks.org.
Okay, we're going to post that. And we do know that you work with our governor.
Yes.
Governor Whitmore on Suicide Prevention Commission. So that is key itself that the governor is behind some of these events as well and involved. That's wonderful.
Yeah, we have a lot of support in Lansing. We need more. We have to eliminate the stigma associated with mental illness because that will help us bring the suicide rate down.
Most definitely, yes. Well, I mean, so I know that we can't go wrong without getting people involved, whether they're the general public, law enforcement, politicians. Everyone included, because mental illness hits all of us. There's no such thing as so it's just over there and it happens, in the low income area. No, it could be in anyone's household at any time, young or old. And when England closed down the facilities, it was like, well, what do we do now?
Yeah. We left a lot of people out in the street when we did that, and we're still paying for it. That happened 30 years ago.
Yeah.
We're still paying for it. Yeah. And we need more resources. But you made a great point. We need the community support because the community can encourage people who need help to seek help.
Yep.
And that's how we fight that stigma, because we always say stigma's the leading barrier that prevents people from taking the very first steps to getting the help that they need.
Most definitely. Well, I mean, Kevin Fischer, I can always see you on Facebook, but I know I'm going to ask you, will you come back again?
Always.
Okay. Thank you.
Anytime I'm invited.
Thank you so much. So we're going to post the web address down below on the screen, and make sure that we have all your information for your upcoming events. Okay, and definitely keep up with you and see you next time.
I thank you for the opportunity, my friend.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, you know what? You don't have to have a situation currently going on in your household, but I definitely encourage you to get involved with the crisis intervention training team, because why? You want to know if you want to make sure your community is safe, your loved ones know what they need to know, any of those things, and be a part of something that is ongoing. Nothing that's going to just stop one day. No, this is ongoing. So let's get involved. You see the number at the bottom of the screen, 1-800-323-5336. You can email me, Marsha at Just Ask Talk Show, and we'll get that information over to Kevin Fischer and his team, and definitely fill you up with some more information about crisis intervention training. All right. So I'm your host, Marsha Florence, for Just Ask. And what do I always say? If you have a question about a person with a disability or just a general question, don't be afraid to ask Just Ask. I'm your host.